Let's get physical. I promise I won't sing. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I want to talk a little bit about the myths of the love language physical touch. I was actually sent a video from a lovely viewer who had some questions about a video that she had seen on TikTok. Maybe you've seen this video because I do believe it went viral. The gist of the video was there was this husband who kept like just aggressively grabbing his wife like in different parts of her body while she was doing things around the house and saying that he was doing this because physical touch was his love language, and eventually his wife like hauled out and hit him because physical touch was not her love language. It was meant to be funny, it was meant to be a joke. Everybody thinks they're a comedian nowadays. But there was an interesting response to it, and the person that actually sent me the video was concerned because apparently there were a lot of men in the comments of this video saying that like, well, what's the purpose in having a wife if you can't like grab her anytime or anywhere you want to grab her? Or, you know, this idea of like, well, what if physical touch is my love language? Like, what am I supposed to do about it? I have a lot of thoughts on this topic, so I wanted to make it into a full YouTube video. Now, I'm gonna start off by saying, and I can't believe I actually have to say this, but I'm gonna say it, that when you are married to someone, they are an actual human being. I know, crazy, right? Insane. And this goes for men or women, although this does feel like this comes up a little bit more when we're talking about how men are treating their wives. But this goes for both men and women. Like, consent is important for all humans. Like, we focus on consent when it comes to women because, well, for one, women are always more vulnerable in sexual situations because men are physically stronger, women hold the risk of pregnancy. So protecting women is a higher priority. That said, when it comes to things like physical touch, when it comes to things like sexual initiation and stuff, men have a right to consent as well. Like, they don't need to just be sex machines for somebody, right? Like, they have a right to say when they are comfortable being touched and how they're comfortable being touched, the same way that women do. So in general, our relationships would all be much healthier and stronger if we all just treated each other like we were actual human beings. Crazy, right? Yeah. And yes, there is something to the fact that if two people get married and they are in a marriage together and it's established that they're not going to have sex with anybody else, then it is important for both people to prioritize having a sexual connection with each other. That said, you also should both be allowed to say, not tonight, right? Because both people should be a full-bodied yes to having sexual intercourse. And if it's a no for either person, it shouldn't happen. You never should feel obligated to have sex with somebody in any given moment, or to just endure somebody touching you in a way that makes you uncomfortable in any given moment. That said, if you're constantly feeling like you don't want physical touch or sexual interactions or anything with your partner, it's important for both of you to get to the root of why that is. Like, why is that happening? And work on why that's happening. And that's where a lot of people, I think, get stuck. I actually did hear someone say this actually on TikTok in another video at one point, that's like, you hear a lot of men, and this can happen to men or women, but in this particular case we're talking about men, that whine that their wife never wants to have sex with them, but they don't actually try to find out why. The why is important, right? Why are you two not coming together sexually? Like, where are you disconnected? If you're going to be in a relationship together as a couple and you are not actually having a fulfilling sexual life together, it's the responsibility of both of you to work on why that is. There is also another thing I want to mention in the video with the husband and wife and the physical touch thing before I actually dive into the love language physical touch. I want to make a note that it is so important for women, specifically, especially in this situation, to be able to express their yeses and nos. I have a whole course about feminine communication that dives into this topic much deeper, but I've said this before in a lot of videos that men in general are not wired to pick up on subtlety the same way that women are. While I know that the original video was staged, so to speak, so the woman wasn't really giving him too many cues, probably because this was a staged thing, but you know, if as a woman, if your husband is touching you in a way that's making you uncomfortable or doing something to initiate sex that's making you really uncomfortable, if you're just kind of assuming that you're not responding to him, or you're assuming that you're kind of like, ugh, disgusted look or something, is sending him a signal that he's not doing what you want him to do, it probably isn't. And yes, there is something to the idea that men need to be paying attention to their feminine partner's responsiveness. However, As women, we can often think that we are expressing our disgust or dislike of something that a man is doing when we're really being way too subtle for him to actually get the hint. It is important as women for us to learn how to properly communicate to a masculine partner if he's doing something that is making us uncomfortable. And the video, while it was supposed to be a joke, what this woman was doing was building up all this resentment for the way that her husband was reacting, and that was building up and building up and building up, and eventually it came out with her like hauling out and hitting him. That's not the best way to handle that situation, right? The best way to handle that situation is to tell your husband in the moment that what he is doing is making you uncomfortable. It's not making you feel loved the way that he may think that it's making you feel loved. Now, there is a caveat, because there were a lot of women that I noticed in the comments of this original video that were saying that even watching a man do this was bringing up a lot of trauma for them. Some women in these moments, and even in other sexual moments, they go into like a trauma response. Sometimes it's a freeze, sometimes it's a fawn, like it's all kinds of different trauma responses you can have. Sometimes it's anger and rage and things like that. Like oftentimes as women, we can have a trauma response to something. A freeze response of just like not knowing how to react at all is very common. If your partner does do something like this, and you do have some kind of a trauma response, so in that moment, you cannot express to him what it is that he's doing that's making you uncomfortable. It's important to work on that. Like, it's important to work on, like, hey, why is that triggering you? What can you bring up? Like, how can you learn how to be able to work through that trauma response so you can express yourself in that moment. However, while expressing your discomfort or your no in the moment is ideal, you can also, in a neutral situation, talk to your partner and explain to him about the response that you went through and how his behavior and actions are making you feel. You want to focus on how it makes you feel and express to him that you didn't respond that way in the moment because of your trauma response. Being open and vulnerable and honest and direct with your masculine partner is usually the best way to go. Try not to be too accusatory, because that can usually kick in the masculine ego and will get him defensive, and that you're just gonna end up in a battle of egos and it's not gonna work. It's better for you to express to him how it's making you feel and being open and vulnerable. A masculine partner who truly loves you is going to care about how his actions are making you feel, and is going to want to create a safe space for you, and is going to want to know how he can cultivate a sexual relationship with you in a way that will open you up as opposed to shut you down. If you're with a partner who doesn't want to do that, and you won't necessarily know unless you try it, so it's important to give it a try. If he is shutting down, doesn't care about how you feel, thinks he can do whatever he wants to do, you've got bigger problems on your hands, which is a whole other topic in itself. I'm not someone who's gonna sit there and be like, girl, leave him, because there's so many factors when it comes to a relationship. But I also know that you know, people are ready to face their relationship issues when they're ready to face their relationship issues. But if he doesn't actually care at all about his actions and that his actions might be hurting you, that's a red flag, and you're probably gonna have to do some work on your relationship. It's deeper than what you can go into in just a YouTube video. All that said, let's get into a little bit about the love language physical touch, which I think is actually one of the most misunderstood love languages. Gifts is up there, but I would say physical touch is probably one of the most misunderstood. The love languages is actually a book. There's a book all about the love languages. This is where the whole term originated, and it's a really short book. It's an easy read. I highly recommend that you check it out. I've read it. It actually amazes me how many times I've been in discussions with people online about the love languages, and they'll start throwing these things out that are so untrue about the love languages, and they're like, I'm trying to explain to them like what the love languages are and what they mean, and they're like, what do you know? I'm like, well, I've read the book. Have you even read the book? And they haven't even read the book. And I'm like, okay, I know I'm not some kind of like licensed therapist, but at least I've read the book that actually explains the love languages. You know what I mean? I've gotten in some like very long, drawn out debates with people online. It just like boggles my mind. But anyway, one thing that they actually address in the book is the fact that many men believe that their love language is physical touch because they like sex. They address this in the book. However, sex is not actually part of the love languages. It could be part of physical touch. However, if you're talking about a man who just likes the sexual aspects of physical touch and isn't really interested in the non-sexual aspects of physical touch, hugging, cuddling, holding hands, like literally just like having like skin to skin contact that is non-sexual, then physical touch is not a man's love language. If a man is only interested in the sexual aspects of physical touch, that's not his love language. But a lot of men who don't have any clue about the love languages will jump to assuming it's physical touch because they like sex. And they think that if they say that their love language is physical touch, that they can use that as a reason for constantly needing sex. That's not the case. There's also a big misconception about love languages that I think people get very confused. Your love language, the love language that is your love language, is how you feel like you receive love. For example, if your love language is words of affirmation and somebody is constantly giving you physical touch, you're not going to receive that love as much as you would if that person was giving you like verbal compliments, because your love language is how you receive love. So knowing your love language is important because it can help you know what to ask your partner for so that your partner isn't constantly giving something to you that is not the way you receive love. That's where people get things confused oftentimes, because your love language, the love language where you receive love, where you feel loved, has nothing to do with what you give to the other person. The love you give to the other person has everything to do with what their love language is. So if, for example, say you're a man and you're like, my love language is physical touch, that doesn't mean that you need to be going to your partner and constantly touching them. What it means is letting your partner know that the way that you receive love is through physical touch, so that she can sit there and compliment you all day and tell you how great you are, but giving you a hug at the end of the day is gonna make you feel much more loved than all the words of affirmation. Your love language is how you receive love. Your partner's love language is how you show love. If, say, for example, you are a man and physical touch is your love language, if your partner's is not physical touch, then you constantly touching your partner is not you expressing love to her. If her love language is, say, quality time, then quality time with her is how you would express your love to her. You can express to your partner that your love language is physical touch, so physical touch will go further with you than, say, quality time. However, the way that you would express love to your partner is through quality time, say. One of the caveats to this is very often a sign of what your love language is the thing that you keep giving to somebody else because you're actually trying to get that back within yourself. So say, for example, if your love language is, say, gifts, you may feel inclined to constantly give people gifts because what you're really craving is somebody doing that for you. Or, for example, if your love language is acts of service, you may find yourself constantly doing for somebody else because you're kind of hoping that they'll give you that love language in return. When in reality, that's only gonna work if the other person has that love language of acts of service or gifts or something like that. You're better off when you are in a relationship finding out what the other person's love language is and giving them that and expressing to your partner what your love language is and being open to them giving you your love language. In an ideal situation, each of you would be giving each other their love language because that's how they will feel loved. If you read the book, it gives you this information, and there's also a quiz at the end of the book. I think there is a quiz online you can take that will actually tell you your love language. And if you are in a partnership with someone, they can take the quiz too and find out their love language. Now, one of the caveats to this is that while the love languages thing can be very helpful, people can get too caught up in that and kind of start to limit themselves to only one way of expressing or receiving love. I know if you're somebody like me who's taken the quiz, I have like 3 different love languages that are like my top, and I have like 2 that are like the bottoms. So generally speaking, I don't love to tell people to get too focused on expressing just one love language because that might be the other person's, because in reality, for most of us, we're gonna find some joy and pleasure and experience in all of the love languages. So while I do think that learning about the love languages can be a helpful tool in your relationship, I'm also somebody who doesn't really think that getting too caught up in just doing one specific one for someone is necessarily the way to go. Now, if it turns out that one person has like an overwhelming love language and you're in partnership with them and that's how you feel like they're receiving love from you and things are going really well, go for it. But I also don't want people to get too caught up in like just expressing one kind. But as I've said before, if your love language is physical touch, it doesn't just give you the permission to go up and touch somebody else all the time because that's how you feel loved. This also gets into the concept of erotic blueprints. Now, if you're not familiar with what erotic blueprints are, you can look it up online. There is a quiz online. There is a course too about them. I have not taken the course. I know people who've taken the course, but I have not actually taken the whole course in studying them. I don't think there's a book to my knowledge. The erotic blueprints are kind of like the love language for your libido. They're very similar to the love languages, but they are more for cultivating sexual energy. It works similar to the love languages, and if you find out what your erotic blueprint is, it can help you to express to your partner like how to turn you on, and if you know what your partner's is, it will help you know how to turn them on. So there's actually 5 different erotic blueprints. I'm not going to dive into all of them here, but there's 2 that I think are somewhat significant because I think they're the most common, and I think you do see them. It says in the material that you don't see them in any higher numbers in men or women, but I would argue in my observation that you see them a little bit more in either men or women. The sensual erotic blueprint, and that's being turned on by all of the senses, like having your senses turned on. And there's the sexual erotic blueprint, which is actually being turned on by like sex specifically. Those are the people that are more turned on by, say, like a naked body or seeing genital organs or like seeing people have sex, or the actual act of sex turns them on. Even though the people that created these erotic blueprints claim that there's just as many men who are sensual and just as many women who are sexual, I find, generally speaking, that women tend to lean more towards the sensual and men often lean more towards the sexual. A lot of men need like direct like sexual contact, like even just direct sexual stimulation in order to be turned on sexually. Whereas for most women, they're gonna need more foreplay, so to speak. They're gonna need more of their senses activated in order to be turned on sexually. There's actually a saying, and I've heard David Data say this. I don't know if he was the original one to say it or not, but it's this idea that men are like blowtorches and women are like crock pots. So like a man can typically he can get hot real quick and then turn off real quick. Whereas with a woman, it takes her a longer time for her to heat up. But when she heats up, like, she's hot, right? So oftentimes with men, they can get into this idea of like, okay, ready for sex now. And as a woman, she's still warming up. Like she's not hot yet, right? That's where the disconnect happens. And this is where the erotic blueprints come in because, for example, say you are a sensual woman and you have a sexual man. If you are a sexual man and you approach your sensual woman like she is sexual, that's where you get the, like, he'll just go up, grab her butt or grab her boob or something like that. For most women, especially if they're more of a sensual woman, that's too much for them. It's too much. It's too much too quick. Like, they're not warmed up for that. It's going from like 0 to 100, like right off the bat. Like she's cold. She's not warmed up yet, right? It's gonna be too much. She's gonna be overstimulated, and she's probably gonna push you away, even if she's attracted to you, even if she loves you, even if she does actually want to have a sexual experience with you. It's too much. It's too much too quick. Whereas a sensual woman who has a sexual male partner, for him, she may be trying to kind of entice him and really kind of engage his senses and take things really slow, and he might be like, okay, can we just get to sex? Like, this stuff is like, he might even find that boring or maybe a little bit grating on his nerves because he's like, okay, I want to get to sex. Like, I'm ready for sex now, right? It's different. It's a difference in turn-ons and stimulation. Two of you can really find a way to meet each other. That's when things are kind of ideal, right? Because if the end game that you want, which I'm assuming that for most couples, the end game is to have a really healthy, fulfilling sex life, it's important to figure out what each other's turn-ons are and actually bring each other's turn-ons to the table. So if, say, for example, you have the sensual woman and you have the sexual man, if you have the sexual man do things maybe throughout the day to get the sensual woman turned on, you know, like maybe sends her a romantic text message, or maybe, you know, kisses her passionately in the morning when you know that you're possibly gonna have like a hot date that night, or something kind of like little things throughout the day to kind of like get her turned on, to kind of engage her senses. Another big one is if she's really overtired and overstressed and in her head, taking something off her plate, maybe saying like, okay, you know, she made dinner, saying like, okay, I'll wash the dishes, you go take like a sensual bath, or do something sensual for your body, or, you know, giving her a little bit of space, saying like, you'll put the kids to bed so she can take a little bit of time and do some like sensual movement or something to like get in her body and get in her senses, herself even. Creating space for her to indulge in her sensuality, or presenting her with something that engages her sensuality, will help her open up and prep for the moment, so that if that sensual woman knows that her partner is a sexual man, when she actually does feel like she's in that like juicy sensuality and she's like kind of ready for them to like step it up, she can give him a signal that she's ready by, say, maybe like grabbing his butt or like grabbing him some way. That aggression is probably going to be more of a turn on for him. Obviously, this is within consensual situations and you have to get to know your partner. I'm not just saying like randomly go up and grab your partner inappropriately. If that's the dynamic that we're talking about here, and this is just one example, if he needs that kind of like direct sexual stimulation, if she uses that as a way to signal to him that like, hey, I'm ready, and he has been warming her up by either creating a sensual experience for her or giving her the space to create her own sensual experience so that she can actually get into that kind of like juicy sexuality, then the two of them can come together, because you're each giving each other what they need, as opposed to you focusing on just what you need for sexual turn on. I mean, it's similar to the love languages in the sense that knowing each other's erotic blueprint means that you know what your partner needs to get turned on. And when you give your partner what they need to get turned on, and your partner gives you what you need to get turned on, that's when the two of you can get turned on together. That's the key. If you're solely worried about what your turn-ons are, and you're not concerned at all with what your partner's turn-ons are, that's where you get blockages, right? If you as a man are thinking like, oh, okay, my love language is physical touch, so I can just grab my partner, it's like, okay, but if her love language isn't physical touch, or that's not the physical touch that she needs as a turn-on, then it's really irrelevant, right? If your love language is physical touch and you want that kind of like aggressive grabbing or that very direct stimulation, it's important for you to express to your partner that that's what you want for your turn on from her. That's how you come together, because I'm assuming that the ultimate goal is a healthy, active sex life. And I have gotten a lot of comments recently on random videos talking about relationships and stuff, with men saying things like, well, most women just don't like sex, which is a complete lie. I just tell you, most women are actually much more sexual than men. I said it. Most men are simply addicted to ejaculation, but they're not actually as sexual as women are, because women have much more sexual depth. Like, we have the ability to have multiple orgasms, all kinds of orgasms. Like, women in general are actually more sexual beings. So if a woman is shut down from her sexuality, a lot of that can be cultural, a lot of that can be, we still have, even in our world of promiscuity, we still have a lot of overlap from things like purity culture and a lot of very puritanical religious views that have made women feel like it's like wrong to be sexual, that can shut them down even in situations where it would be completely and totally acceptable for her to be a completely sexual being. So as women, it's important for us to learn to tap into our sexuality for us and for our partner. If you find yourself constantly shutting down with your partner, tune into why that is. Like, tap into why. Is it because you're not getting the sexual stimulation that you need? If that's the case, try figuring out what sexual stimulation you need. If you have a loving masculine partner, he's gonna wanna know what your turn-ons are, and being able to be open and try things out and see what is your turn-on, see what isn't. Learn to let your partner know when something is like a no and when something is a yes. Like, exploring that stuff. I think this is actually another downfall of porn culture, which I've talked a lot about the problems with porn culture, because there are so many, and the more I've actually been learning about all of the side effects of porn culture, it gets worse and worse the more I actually learn about it. But one of the side effects that I see happening is this idea that people seem to think that the first sexual experience they have has to go perfectly. Because oftentimes in porn, they'll see two people getting together and having sex, and well, I mean, it's choreographed. I mean, of course everything is going exactly the way it's supposed to go because there's literally a script, like it's choreographed, there's a director, there's somebody telling them what to do. In real life, in most cases, I'm assuming, you don't have that, right? That's why I've said before that like porn is to sex what like the WWE is to a street fight. Like it's a choreographed, staged production of what sex is. It's not like the real thing, right? It's not like in real life where there's no lighting department, there's no director, there's no script. Like you're on your own, you're figuring things out. That's where too, I always find it interesting how many people, and you know, whether or not you choose to save yourself before marriage or like when you choose to have sex in a relationship is your decision, it's not my decision. That said, people get really caught up in like, well, what if I invest in being with a partner and we're not sexually compatible? Well, the key is if both people in the relationship are open to learning about each other sexually, you can overcome just about any problem as long as people are open to exploring each other sexually. And of course, assuming there aren't like major health concerns or things like that that, you know, may take a lot more work to work through. But generally speaking, if you're dealing with two healthy people, you can learn each other's turn-ons, you can learn each other's bodies. And this idea that we have that like two people are supposed to, especially for women, the idea that women have to be like virgins, but then the minute that they have sex with a guy, they're supposed to all of a sudden know how to be a porn star is like, it's insane. And it's been programmed, especially into men. This is the way things are supposed to go. And I think a lot of women get into this performative mode, assuming that sex has to be perfect every time, that it has to look exactly like it does in porn every time. They have to look like a porn star. That's not what sex was intended to be, right? Sex was intended to be something that two people experience. They're learning each other's bodies, they're connecting with each other's bodies, they're exploring what their turn-ons are, what their turn-offs are. I've said this in other videos, and I actually think this is something where the BDSM community actually has it way above like the regular general population, and the fact that there's so much consent that actually gets like weaved into their sexual play. They're very big on communication, which is super important. And you know, we could all benefit from that more. We could all benefit from people actually taking the time to learn each other's bodies, learn each other's turn-ons, learn each other's turn-offs, their love languages, their erotic blueprints, all these kind of things. You know, you can take the love language quiz, you can take the erotic blueprint quiz. There's actually another quiz too that I took, somebody recommended to me, that was actually a BDSM thing. I don't actually have any personal experience in BDSM, but I did take this quiz that will like tell you like what your kinks are and stuff. It goes really in depth and it's got all these different kinks, and it will actually tell you like what percentage of like which kinks you are and stuff. I took it, I thought it was fascinating. For somebody who has not had a lot of experience with like kinky anything, it was kind of fascinating to see the things that I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that is kind of a turn on for me. And not necessarily that you have to start getting into BDSM or kink or anything like that. It can kind of help you tap into which energies sexually you kind of want to tap into a little bit more and which ones you don't. And I think just being open to that, and if you have two people who are open to exploring each other's bodies and learning more about each other, that's the key, right? And the idea that we have this idea in our society that like, okay, well, these are my turn-ons, this is what I'm showing up with, if this other person isn't on board, then we're just not compatible and that's it, right? I mean, in some cases, two people may just not be sexually compatible because you just can't get on the same page with things. And, you know, if people don't want to work on being sexually compatible, then, you know, maybe you aren't aligned with each other. But actually learning about the other person, and actually both people, and again, can't believe I'm even saying this, if both people can realize that they're both individual humans and you're coming together to have a relationship, and if you take into consideration like both people's love languages, erotic blueprints, turn-ons, kinks, things like that, and you start to weave them together, like that's how you cultivate a sexual relationship with someone. And I do believe that it's a priority for people. I know it's so easy in today's culture. There's so many distractions, jobs, careers, children, families, all kinds of responsibilities can come up. That said, I don't think that people should ever feel like sex is an obligation, because it should never feel like it's another chore or another thing on your to-do list. That said, cultivating a sexual relationship with your partner is important for you and your partner, because in reality, that sexual relationship is what sets your relationship apart from friendships or other types of relationships, right? It's being able to cultivate that sexual energy and prioritizing that in your relationship, but prioritizing that in learning and exploring each other's turn-ons, and not just prioritizing the simple act of sex, but prioritizing your overall sexual chemistry. That's how you help cultivate a loving relationship. And that kind of relationship where two people are cultivating their sexual energy together is going to overflow in other areas of your life. I mean, I've seen it happen with couples who they start cultivating that, they end up becoming better parents, they end up becoming better, you know, co-workers, they become better bosses, they become better, you know, at their careers, they become better in their communities, because cultivating that loving sexual energy within your relationship really does cultivate a better energy with the world. Highly recommend looking into the works of Kim Anami. She does a lot of stuff on this topic, dives into it much deeper. I've taken several courses from her and she's got great online content, so I highly recommend you check her out as well. Physical touch can be a wonderful thing. It can be people's love languages. It's one of my top love languages for sure, but it is very misinterpreted. And it's not just about sex, and it's also not just about being able to grab your partner whenever. So I know the original video that somebody sent me and that kind of got controversial was meant to be a joke, but I do think it highlights some areas where many of us in relationships are not actually coming together and communicating properly. So I'm really glad that this topic was requested, because it is something I've seen come up as a pattern a lot. So I really hope this video was helpful to people who may be misunderstanding the concept of love languages. While I don't really ascribe to focusing so much on the love languages, it is a great book and it's a short, easy read. So if you really do want to learn more about the love languages, I highly recommend you check out the book. And again, I would be leery of any man who jumps to the idea that his love language is physical touch and uses that as an excuse to behave a certain way. Because again, like they do say in the book, that is a common misconception among men. And there are some men who their love language is absolutely physical touch, and that's not to be just totally dismissed. However, if you're dealing with somebody who's using that as an excuse for certain behavior, or just using that as an excuse as to why they need sex. That said, I will say, oftentimes men need physical intimacy to get to emotional intimacy, and women need emotional intimacy to get to physical intimacy. That was another thing I want to talk about in this video. That is very common, and oftentimes that's where couples can get into kind of a stalemate, where he's like, well, I won't give her any emotional intimacy unless she gives me physical intimacy. And she's like, well, I'm not going to give him any physical intimacy until he gives me emotional intimacy. You're both stuck, right? You're in a stalemate. You're not moving, right? You're both frozen. The key is, one of you, whichever one it is, the reality is the answer of whoever it is the person who realizes that they're in a pattern first. Because if you realize you're in the pattern and then you wait for the other person to make a move, you're part of the problem. So whichever one of you it is that realizes that you're in the pattern, it's up to you to make the first move. And what I would suggest is gift your partner as much of what it is that they need as you feel comfortable giving to them in that moment. So say, for example, say you're a woman, because I know most of my audience is women. Say as a woman, you're in that stalemate where he's like, well, I won't give you emotional intimacy until you give me physical intimacy. And you're like, well, I'm not going to give you physical intimacy until you give me emotional intimacy, right? Tune into your body in that moment. It'll probably be a different answer depending on the moment. Tune in that moment and say, okay, how much physical intimacy can I give him in this moment? Like, how much can I gift him? It might not be much. It might simply be, you know, a simple touch on the hand, or it might be a hug. It might be more, I don't know. But like, you want to kind of get just to that point where you're kind of just up on that edge, right? Because my guess is when you're in that moment, like, you don't feel like jumping his bones right in that moment, right? If you do, go for it. I'm not telling you not to. Find out where your edge is. Like, where's that, like, what is the most physical intimacy that you feel comfortable, and don't force yourself to do anything that you're not comfortable with, but like, what is the point that I can give him that while still feeling safe in my body? And then gift that to him. Now, see how much that opens him. Because if you're in that stalemate, if that starts to open him more, so he's giving you more emotional intimacy, then you can then tune into, okay, now I'm getting more from him. Now in this moment, how much more can I give to him? Like, how much more physical intimacy can I give to him? And that's where you start playing in a dance of slowly opening each other, right? So neither one of you is just going whole hog into you know, going way out of your comfort zone and giving the other person just too much and then building up resentment. You're literally now in that dance of like, okay, so now you've opened a little bit, so now he's opening a little bit, and you're each kind of in that dance of opening a little bit until you get to that moment where he has the physical intimacy that he needs and you have the emotional intimacy that you need, and you now come together. And this goes in reverse. Like if you're a man watching and you're in this situation with this stalemate and whatever, like gift her as much emotional intimacy as you feel like you can give her in that moment with what she's giving you or with the situation, and see if that opens her a little bit to more physical intimacy. Whichever one of you is the one that feels the pattern first is the one who has to take the first move. Now, if what you're doing is gifting them as much as you think you possibly can and it's not shifting anything with them in that moment, it might be time to just be like, okay, I'm just gonna go and do what I need to do right now, and you can do what you need to do right now, and maybe this is just not the moment for us to be doing this. Maybe we just kind of need to like go back to regular life and not practice this in the moment because it may not be the right time. If you either find yourself constantly being the one to start the process and you're starting to build resentment's a big red flag in a relationship, you probably are going to want to talk to some kind of an outside source, or maybe get some counseling, or, you know, a coach or something like that, because you're probably going to need more in-depth work on your relationship, either individually or together, whatever you decide that you need. I would also say too, if this is constantly happening and you just constantly cannot break through to each other and you just cannot get to where you both need to be, that's also a time when I think that it's probably best to sit down, have a conversation about things, or maybe talk to a neutral third party. Obviously, I can't go into every scenario here in an individual YouTube video, but I just think that's a good place you might want to start. Like, what can I gift this person, and where is my comfort zone with how much I can gift this person, to see if maybe you can kind of break the pattern and maybe open them up a little bit more. Because I do think that that's often where men get confused with this idea that physical touch is their love language. Because for many men, they need the physical intimacy to get to the emotional intimacy. That doesn't necessarily mean that their love language is physical touch, but I do think it's easy for a lot of people, especially if they haven't really learned a lot about what the love language actually is and things like that. I think it can be an easy conclusion for men to jump to. But again, if you're a man and you're thinking like, hey, my wife just doesn't like sex and she doesn't want to have sex and is like, she never wants to have sex with me, the best question you can ask yourself is why? Why doesn't she want to? I think a lot of men don't ask that question because I think a lot of men are afraid of what that answer might be. But let's face it, in a relationship, you need to have vulnerability, and you need to be able to ask the hard questions. You need to be able to speak your truth, and you may not hear everything that you want to hear in a relationship, but it's more important to actually get to the root of the problems in the relationship than it is for two people to be constantly hearing what they want to hear. Because as I've mentioned in other videos, like, radical honesty in a relationship is so important, because even when the truth hurts, the truth is always going to bring you to the place that you're meant to be. Even if that means that the relationship might have to come to an end, which I know can be terrifying for some people, but radical honesty is always the answer. The truth will always lead you in the direction that you were meant to be in. It might be the scary direction. It may not be the one that feels safe. It may not be the one that you ultimately think in that moment that you want. The truth will always guide you where it is that you need to go and where you need to be. So I hope that this video was helpful. I know this was requested, and I do know that there was a lot of controversy around this video and this drama, and there's a lot of misconceptions around the concept of physical touch. I mean, I would say that gifts is also a very misunderstood love language, because women automatically get called gold diggers too, but that's a whole other video. So I posted something about that years ago, and man, did I get hate. Whew, that's a whole other topic for a whole other day. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. If you have any thoughts on this topic or any other topic requests, let me know. This was a requested topic, and I'm so glad that it was, because I know that people are going to find this helpful. I always love your suggestions. If you have any, please leave a comment in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you, and I'm always open to a respectful discussion. You can have a difference of opinion as me, as long as we can keep it respectful. If you're a woman who would like to connect to her feminine energy, I have online courses. Details are in the description box below, along with links to all my social media accounts. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.